Namaste and welcome to this episode of the Festival of Bharat. Today's talk is going to be an interesting one. I have with me someone who has been on our show before and regaled us with his Hindi. And why is that unusual? Because Biharilal ji is actually an Australian who is otherwise called Charles Thomson. Just a little introduction to Charles ji. His love affair with Bharat began at the age of 13 when he came here to learn yoga and lived in Bihar for many years. He's now an Indian citizen and divides his time between Bharat and Australia. He's a yoga and meditation instructor. He has had an interesting, varied, and diverse career path that has included working in the finance sector, food industry, acting, and the media. He has, in fact, appeared in Hindi and Marathi teleserials and has even acted in a few films in both the languages. He regularly organizes and participates in various film festivals both in India and Australia. Namaste, Charles G or Bihari Lal Ji. Which do you prefer?
I don't mind. India gives names, I take them. I have more. Not just Bihari. I like Bihari Lal. That's a beautiful name, and that was given to me by BBC Hindi actually many years
Oh,
ago. But
okay.
I also have Otowala Babu. That was given to me
Yes.
by Z. And then I have Gora Babu and so many. Deshi Babu, so many. Gora Bihari, so many. So I take the names. I love them all.
Okay, for the purpose of this talk, I'll slip between Bihari Lal ji and Charles ji, so that people remember that you are both. You're Australian as well as Indian.
Sure.
Um, so, welcome and thank you for making the time. You're in Australia right now, and so you're a good half hours ahead of us.
Yes.
Um, so, Charles I'm going to start with in your previous talk with us. I mean, we couldn't do justice to your vast range of experiences in India because you've lived here for such a long time, and you came here when you were a little boy. You came here when you were 13 in the 70s. And this was also a very interesting period because you did happen to mention in the earlier talk that you lived in India during the emergency period, right? So I want to
Yes.
get to that first because this was a difficult time in the history of our country for good 2 years, right? From 75 to 77, I think a few months there, I think a little over 2 years. And could you tell us a little bit about how it was for a boy your age, an outsider at that, to have witnessed that period? And I want to talk about it now also because there is so much name calling and there's so much talk about India being an autocracy and all of that by certain sections of the society and also certain political parties. I think it needs to be people need to be reminded that India has already been through a really dark period where people's rights were actually taken away from them. So democracy was in suspension. So, Charles G, what did you see when you were here?
Okay. So at that time, I was probably this is between the ages of 14 and 16. And I was very naive. I was very innocent. I was staying in a gurukul, and nobody explained to me you don't travel without money. And that too in India. So I was traveling sometimes by my own in what we called third class. So there was no ticket, but once you got in the train, it was almost impossible to get out. So you had to know well in advance, otherwise, you'd miss your station. So I can never forget because even during the emergency, because I was staying in a gurukul, we were very much protected because we had little exposure to what was really happening in the outside world. But there was one moment that I'll never forget. I was in the train and there was a number of young Hindu boys with blood running down their legs. And I was fascinated and confused because I could see from their facial expressions that they were all in shock. So in Hindi, it's called Nasbandi. So what had happened, they had been forcibly grabbed because they were at the bottom of the pyramid and forcibly sterilized or Nasbandi. Now, when at that time I was very innocent, but I was shocked by that. Now, when I recollect that incident and I recollect that time, and I realize how many people, both men and women, were treated in this way, I mean, there's no today we don't know who they are. I think they all died. Not only was the treatment inhumane, but the psychological damage done to a young man or young woman at that time, especially in India at that time, when it was very village-like, is just so profound. I mean, even today in India, the most important institution is marriage. And anybody who spends time in India knows that if you're invited to a marriage, it's a great event. And it's considered that special moment in the life of every individual. And then once they marry, the next most important event is the child. And you take that away. And it was indiscriminate. Now, from what I've in the future studied about this, at the very top, the instructions weren't to force this to happen. But if anybody understands India in those days, as it trickled down to the state and the district administration, it was absolutely impossible to get anybody to volunteer. So the only way was force and capture. So that was in itself a very dark period, even though at the time I was very naive and very innocent. And it's a very sad moment of India's history that should have happened. And I don't think there was ever a genuine attempt to readdress that or revisit and help those people who suffered such a great tragedy on them.
Hmm. True. Actually, what you say is true because I don't think that we even talk about it anymore. I mean, that, Nazbandi and that forced sterilization that happened, we just, it's mentioned in passing. It was mentioned as something that Sanjay Gandhi did on a whim. But I don't think there's ever been any study. Now, you just said that who who knows what happened to those many men who were sterilized in an perhaps in an unhygienic conditions, unclinical conditions. What happened to them? Nobody really knows. So, yeah. Apart from that, did you witness anything else, or what were your other observations when you
Okay,
were here in the
so I
70s?
was in Bihar, which basically, when you left from somewhere like Calcutta or Delhi, was going back into time. So in Bihar, things were very simple in those days. Let me put it that way. I even can remember when I was about 16 or 17, a friend had an accident on a motorcycle in Patna. So I had to help them and take them to the emergency ward in Patna. And that was in those days, not now, an experience in themselves. I mean, it was total chaos. I can still remember goats, cows, and I think even a few pigs wandering around the hospital. There was even a crazy guy who pretended to be a doctor who would come into the emergency ward, ask the relatives to hold the patient down, do some strange things until somebody shouted that he was crazy and chase him out again. So it was literally a very strange and bizarre time. And two parts to that. Now, the first is I have no doubt that in the villages of India, and I wasn't aware of this, I've only recently studied up on it, it also happened to young women. So this was not done in a nice and friendly way. It was done in a forced manner. So psychologically and physically, I have no doubt. And I can never forget when I took him into the emergency part of the hospital, and what I had to do was curl myself up in the corner of his bed so I could look after him and protect him. In the early morning, suddenly there was so much activity. They came and cleaned up the emergency ward. Then suddenly we had a glass of milk, grapes, and bread put next to our table. And I thought, this is amazing. And then I was told, somebody came and said, I'm not to speak a word or my friend won't be treated. Then a group, I think, of Belgium or European doctors came through. Now, what was amazing, as soon as they left, because that time I was very naive and very young, I wasn't thinking, street smart. The milk, the grapes, and the bread was quickly removed and
Vanished.
taken away. It was just there for show. So you can imagine in those times how difficult it was, for people at the bottom, and even for the middle class. It was
Yes.
a very hard time, but it also was a very fascinating time because that was also the time when you traveled to the villages, and the villages would have wandering sadhus who would just turn up. In the night, they'd sleep under the tree because I would stay with them. They'd play kirtan, teach some yoga. They'd be fed by the villagers and then move on. So that also had its mystic and its magic time as well. So, there's plus and minuses to every period. But politically, it was a very difficult time.
It was, yes. What about Bihar of specifically? See, Bihar has a bit of a notoriety attached to it. As a you would be aware, right? In India, in Bharat, Bihar has always been the truant state, the state that has always has had its issues, right, with problems with violence and mobsters and things like that. Backward state economically, but also one of the largest states in India. What was it like then? And you've been there, I'm sure, of late, recently as well. So could you just talk a little
Oh,
bit about?
yes. Okay. So I have so many stories, but I'll just tell you one quick story.
Yeah.
In Bihar, there is a place called Kyul and Lakhisarai.
Hmm.
Lakhisarai is on one side of the bridge, Kyul's on the other. Now, 40 years ago, what used to happen was it was a junction station. So you would get down at Kyul, and then you would have to get on another train to get on that other journey. But what was unbeknown at that time was you would get down and you tried to get on the train when it came on the other track. And you present your ticket, and the TT would look at the ticket and say, I'm sorry, you can't. This train's 3 days late. You have to wait for your train. So people would spend a couple of days on Kuel Station. So this is the
Okay.
first thing. Second thing, not now, it's completely
Yes.
different world. But then it was completely surrounded by rice fields, completely. So you're in the middle of nowhere. So what used to happen at night was the thieves, the dacoits, would come, and either the power would go off naturally or they'd pull the switch. And then they would rob everybody on the platform. Now, I was one time, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, I was on the platform. It was dark, the electricity gone, and they were robbing everybody, and everybody was screaming. And they knew of my presence. They knew I was there in the corner, but they couldn't see me because it was very dark and I was standing in a very dark corner. And they had robbed everybody else and even some old sadhu. So at that moment, I had to improvise. I had to think what to do. And my immediate response was to shout out, Bum bum bole, bum bum bole. And one of the dacoits said to the other dacoit, "अरे ये तो गंगाजल वाला है, अरे छोड़े यार, उससे कुछ नहीं मिलने वाला है." And they left. The next morning when the sun rised, everybody was miserable except me. I was sitting there quietly. I had not been disturbed, and I was quite happy there. And the local the locals came, and then somebody served me chai, and I had a samosa, and I was very happy. But because I was so naive, I was so young, and I was so innocent. So for me, India or Bharat has always been this magical journey, but not for everybody. So
I'm
for
sure.
majority. But now the transformation that's happened is in Bihar, it's a huge transformation. There's a lot more work that has to be done, but the infrastructure definitely there has been a
Mm.
massive changes. And this has been to the betterment of Bihar.
True, true. I mean, it still has a long way to go, but I think there has been, and economically also, I think, yes, we've come a long way since those days. Did you ever feel, did you ever feel threatened physically while you were living in India, specifically in Bihar? Were you ever fearful for your life?
There were a number of times when I was in situations where any logical person would absolutely feel threatened. But I was such a naive, forthright young individual, thinking that a guru would protect me, that I would approach the thieves. I met many of them, and they became my friends. Also, there was something else that used to happen, which even today, I just was amazed. The sadhu that came to my home in Australia when I was 11, that made such a profound influence on me. I used to just meet him on the side of the road in different parts of Bihar and sometimes in Delhi, just by chance. And when I'd meet him, he'd give me an address and say, go and meet this senior officer. I would go to see that senior officer. The next thing I would stay with that senior officer in their home for a few days. They would feed me because I was skinny. I was just absolutely thin bones, right? Like an Aztec. And I would teach them yoga, and we had a wonderful connection. So, that included district magistrates, SPs, commissioners, DGs, members of
That's
parliament. So,
interesting.
and to me, rather than feeling threatened, to me it was just a magical part of my journey in India, and I thoroughly enjoyed every
Mhm.
single minute of it. I mean, I did get diarrhea, I did get food poisoning. That was tough, but I knew no better, so I just got over it and I moved on.
That didn't make you, those experiences didn't make you, not want to come back or want to leave. Because that's the reaction of a lot of first time Westerners when they come to India. A lot of them either hate it with a passion and go and never come back, or then of course there are those who fall in love eventually. So did you have like a strong reaction? I mean, clearly you didn't, but was it ever a time where you felt that, my God, I can't take it? Because this was, you were living here in times that were, India was not economically, we were quite behind times in those days. So did you ever feel the need to want to run back home?
Okay, once again, I'll narrate a small story. I started in the yoga school reading Amachitra comics, and I loved them.
Love
Oh,
them.
and they were beautiful. And in fact, I believe my late teacher or my late guru inspired the gentleman who wrote them. But anyway,
Pai, Mr. Pai, Anand Pai, yes.
that's right. Yes, yes, he inspired him. So I was reading some of those copy, and they had a great influence on my thinking and my ways. So in those days, the yoga school was very small,
Mhm.
and I slept outside the main teacher's residence, and I was in charge of the gate for people coming in and out. And just beside us was a giant mango tree, and this mango tree would even have mangoes, just the odd mango, outside out of the season. And because we were on such a simple, basic diet, I mean, we didn't even have milk in our tea. It was maybe once in a month. So we just had roti, chapati, dal, sabji, and black tea. So our life was very, very simple. So I used to lie down in my bed on the choki in my machadani looking at this mango. So one day I was about 14, and another boy from Colombia who was also 14, we made a plan that when the institution was locked down, at night we would climb up this tree and we could see one or two mangoes. We'd pick them and have these mangoes. So we did this plan and we climbed up the tree. Then, lo and behold, for the very first time, our teacher came outside, turned on the light, and we made our beds to look like we were sleeping in our beds. And we were paralyzed up in the mango tree. So we had to hold and absolutely stay silent. Now, I'd read those Amachitra comics about how young devotees had looked after the sage or the rishi, and even when they were bitten, they didn't make a sound. We were bitten by bull ants. Bull ants were biting us, and
That's
they're
a
very big. I don't know if you've been to Bihar, but the bull ants are very big. They were biting us, and both
oh.
of us kept absolute silence. Then, after some time, our teacher, he went back inside, locked the gate, turned off the lights. Now, by this time, we had lost total interest in the mangoes. We both came down and never ventured back up. But why I tell this story is the whole purpose of a gurukul or a system like this is to teach one simple thing, and that is self discipline. And that teaching of self discipline throughout my life has probably been one of the greatest gifts that I've ever received. No matter what the difficulties I've faced, and I've faced difficulties even in Australia, I have had the largest multinational try to bankrupt me, take me through the courts. And it's through my practice of self discipline and sadhana that's kept my stability, my calmness, my focus, and has got me ahead. And I've had this amazing life where every 10 years I reinvent myself and start a completely new career and a completely new horizon in my life.
How lovely. And You mentioned in one of your, so you how long were you in this? I'm guessing this was Bihar School of Yoga, if I'm not.
Well, yeah, I normally don't mention the name, and the reason I do that for a purpose is there are so many yoga schools today, and so many people are saying this school's better than the other. I don't get involved in that.
Yes,
It's oldest, it's got the most
yes,
publications, but it's for the
yes,
serious sadhak, people
correct.
who really want to go a lot further than just hearing Agrabati, Ganti, Baba, and all
Correct.
of that. But that's also wonderful. They're all wonderful institutions for a lot of people. So I spent 11 years of my life there.
11 years.
Yes.
So you came as a 13-year-old and you were a good 24 when you finished your training. Your
No, I didn't finish my training. I was thrown out.
Oh yeah, you
So
had to leave. Yes.
yes,
Tell us about that.
every foreigner in India, and I was alerted to this beforehand, secretly, which is also very interesting. And all these people are now longer with us, so I can tell this secret. So what happened was the prime minister at the time was a Christian.
Mhm.
Nobody in India knows this, but that gentleman was a Christian. His wife
100%.
was, and
100%.
he followed Catholicism, which is fine.
Mm.
And up before him, and I know this for a fact, even many of the priests had a really hard time renewing their visas, even under
Mm.
Indira Gandhi and
Mm.
all the state governments. So now was his time to show. So a secret order was signed, and all foreigners in India who had anything to do with Ayurveda, yoga institutes, or Sanatan Dham were to be given 48-hour notice and told to leave. Now, looking back, part of the joke of it was that if it was for the security of the country, nobody got these notices at once. Somebody got it today, somebody got it in 6 months' time. So, that was a joke. But before this happened, the Director General of Bihar is no longer with us, and the governor, who was a Muslim at the time, a wonderful gentleman. I both used to go and spend time with them, teach them yoga, stay in the Raj Bhavan, and also stay with the Director General of Police at his home. And they both told me, look, we want you to become भारत नागरिक था। अब ले लीजिए, आप एप्लीकेशन डाल दीजिए, हम लोग सपोर्ट करेंगे, क्योंकि आगे सब विदेशी को निकालना है इस देश से। Then I thought to myself, if Bharat really wants us to go, then let it get rid of me and throw me out। हाँ, तो अब इसलिए मेरा मन में ये सोचा कि कभी आगे में जीवन में हम भारत नागरिक बनेंगे, और भारत नागरिक बनने के बाद जब भी मन है, आ सकता है, जब भी मन है, जा
Just
सकता है। कोई तकलीफ नहीं है, कोई भी सिखा रहेगा। So anyway, that's the answer to that question.
lovely. But I remember you mentioning that you were actually very close, or you were in the neighborhood when Indira Gandhi was assassinated.
Okay,
Can you talk about that? That sounds like a very interesting tale. A
actually,
little bit, maybe.
some things I don't speak about because they're very dark, and even people today are alive who are involved in that. The
Okay.
fact
Okay.
is that after her assassination, right, I used to teach the Chief Justice yoga, and I used to stay at his home, and he lived next door to Indira Gandhi, and we
Ah,
thought they were firecrackers. But the problem is, justice has never been done to all the Sikhs who suffered after that. It was a very complicated time. I'm aware of how much respect there was for Indira Gandhi at the time. And, it was a very complicated, and I was also very young. So I was very naive and not aware so much of the politics of it. I did meet her cousin, who was the Home Minister, Arun Nehru. I wasn't impressed with that guy. Um, there was another minister they used to meet, which I had, Chandrasekhar Singh. He was from Bihar, and
hmm.
we used to have a wonderful time together. But I can tell you that this I can share with you. I was staying with the Secretary for Telecommunications of India at the time. I was staying at his home. He's the nephew of Lal Bahadur Shastri, and he at his home showed me Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister.
Oh, the shows, the
He had the tapes. He showed them,
oh,
and he said, "No minister is just like that." And I won't say who his minister was. So I've seen India, Bharat from all its shades and from all its angles, right?
how interesting. How interesting.
So people who haven't seen Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, it's all on YouTube.
Oh, I
And
have.
the bubbles of India will admit off the record This is the fact that bubbles run the country, not politicians.
Well, the babudom is really the the legacy of the British. I mean, the babus were left behind by the British essentially.
Left them behind in Australia. How come India ended up with them? There's no Babadums in Australia.
There is, well, I think because they needed a conduit, or I think they needed some kind of a wire media between the Bada Sahib and the the poor plebeians who were in this working on this on the ground. They needed a system of, or a
Yes.
group of people like the brown sepoys, we call them, right?
No,
The
and
sepoy system. Yeah,
yes, and I always say this, that India is actually like Europe. Every state is ek alag desh hai. It has its own culture, its
bilkul.
own language, its own beliefs. So when you put them all together, for any foreign invader to run that place, they have to put some sort of mechanism in place. So that,
Mm.
that obviously I think it was called the ICS initially.
ICS, yes, yes.
I yeah, yes, that's right.
But
Yes.
they do have. I mean, I don't know how come they didn't have it in Australia, because they themselves have the civil servants in Britain. Britain themselves, the British themselves have a system of civil servants, right? They do, don't they?
Yeah, but Australia was settled a majority by convicts, and convicts were at the bottom of the system. And what people don't realize is that Britain had a very strong caste system. This idea that only India has a caste system, forget it. Under royal families, there were a very strong caste system, and the people at the very bottom was forcibly sent to Australia. So they had an intolerance for authority. So that's why when they developed the capital of Australia, Melbourne and Sydney got a ruler and said, "Look, where's the middle?" They found a sheep farm, and we'll throw all the politicians there, and that became Canberra. And that's a true fact.
Canberra.
And of course, one of the things that I find so delightful today in Australia is that if you ask a local Aussie, who's your local mayor or councillor or member of parliament, or even who's your police commissioner or local police, nobody has a clue. But our new Indian Aussie migrants, the moment they become a councillor or a relative or a friend, then
Yeah.
everybody knows them in the community.
I guess Australia, like you said, because of the nature of the people who settle there, the convicts, because they have such an open disdain for authority. It's probably apparent even now. I mean, I visited Sydney, Australia in 2017. I had the privilege to go to the parliament, and I thought it was so casual, like anyone can walk in. I mean, there's minimal presence of security, it's not in the face, and people can walk in and watch the proceedings. Well, you can't do that in the Indian parliament, it's not that easy.
Actually, funnily, you should say that because a number of times I've been invited to walk the Lok Sabha, and I've been curious, and also go to Rashtrapati, to where the president sits. But
Yes.
every time that we've tried to arrange it, there's been some security issue, so we've let it go. But
Mm.
New South Wales Parliament and also in Canberra, there's some security, but everybody's welcome. Anybody can go
Very
in.
little, it's not in the face. Yeah,
No, no.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Absolutely.
interesting.
But funnily enough, every time I've visited the Parliament of New South Wales has been for an Indian event, an Indian Australian event. If it had been for an Indian Australian event, I would never have visited New South Wales Parliament.
Interesting.
Yes.
You also made an interesting comment in one of your earlier talks with us. You said that of all the colonial powers, you said the British were the was what was the word you used? Were the
I said the
better
best of
ones?
the worst. Best
Sorry?
of the worst.
Best of the worst. Okay. Would you
Oh,
care
yeah.
to throw some light on that, because we think
Oh,
we think differently?
yeah, no. Okay, I'll give you an example. Have you been to Goa?
Oh, the Portuguese. Yes, of course. Yes, yes, yes.
So one of the first things, I've been to Goa many times.
Mm.
I've traveled all over Goa. Now, one of the first things that hit me was the Goan Christians, the way that they worship. I've also experienced this in Kerala, is so unusual, because what they do is you'll find crosses on the side of the road, and then you'll find them garlanded with flowers and use an agrabati, just as if they were a Hindu. So if you study the history of Goa, what happened was when the Portuguese arrived, you had to do conversion, or your head was chopped off, right? So
Yes.
that and that's why even today you'll find a lot of the Goan Christians, they the way that they show their devotion to Christ is a very
Hindu.
traditional Hindu
Yes.
way. I can never forget I was hosting a film festival in Cochin, in
Mm.
Kerala, and the hotel where I was staying, I honestly thought because I arrived at night that there was a temple next door.
Mm.
The next morning I went across and I saw it's St. Francis of Assisi. They were singing in Malayalam devotional songs
Yes.
to St. Francis of Assisi. But the way they sang them and the way the feeling came across to me was I just naturally presumed that there was a temple across the road. I had
Hmm.
no idea that there was a church.
Interesting.
So that was the Portuguese. Now, if you study about the Spanish in South America and also the French in Africa, I don't justify the British. What the British did was wrong, but it was very much in their self interest. But they were the best of the worst, and that's why I would say that. That doesn't justify that they should be there, and that also doesn't justify many things that happened under their rule. Yes, but yes, of all of the colonial powers at that time, to me, they were the best of the worst.
Hmm. I think there are many sides to this. Maybe you're right there, but I think there are many other shades to this argument. Maybe they were more their approach towards India or Bharat was more tempered because they were dealing with. I think quickly they realized they were dealing with a civilization that was far ahead and far more evolved. So it was not like their experience in Africa, perhaps. It was so maybe they realized that they had to change their approach towards Indians. And also, I think the missionary activity of the British was far less as compared to, I think initially, I think the East India Company, in fact, uh, actively didn't allow missionaries to land, to come to India for evangelical activities. I think that was much more rampant in the Catholic countries like Portugal and France and other countries like Spain. And that's my analysis, I think.
Look, but one thing I will mention, if ever you get the chance and you're in Italy, you go to the Vatican. Now, the Vatican has been there for 2,000 years, basically. The Vatican has a museum, but it also has a library. Now, one of the things that every Christian priest had to do for conversion, wherever they went in the world, was before they converted the locals, they actually had to document in great detail the language, the politics, the history, and what their religion and their beliefs, and even send original documents back to the Vatican. So now in the Vatican, there's a depository of knowledge that is amazing. But I say this quite openly, and I get in a lot of trouble for this, but I say this quite openly. And let me test it on you. Where do you think the Indian ambassador for the Vatican sits?
For the Vatican.
Mm.
You mean we have an ambassador for the Vatican? I didn't know that.
Yes, and a lot of money is spent on this person. Where is it? Where does this person sit?
I'm thinking Italy, somewhere in Rome, maybe?
Okay, I don't know if you've been to Rome. It's
No.
only getting a taxi, and it's 20 minutes from Rome to get to the Vatican. They sit in Austria or Switzerland. That is
Hmm.
a complete rort. It should stop tomorrow. Ministry
Hmm.
of External Affairs has absolutely no justification to put a
Hmm.
person in Austria or Switzerland so they can travel first class to Italy whenever they want to. Number one. Number
Hmm.
two, I've asked this even live on a live TV panel with formal ambassadors. Does the person who's the ambassador to the Vatican have any knowledge of Sanskrit or maybe Tamil?
Of course not.
Now, why am I saying that? Because think of it. Oh, could be Canada or one of Marathi. Imagine if in Rome, India's ambassador actually was done a PhD in Sanskrit or Tamil or Kannada or Marathi or Bhojpuri or Metali, and they could go to the Pope, they could go to the cardinals and very politely say, this library, which has very restrictive access, please allow me some access to access these documents for me to take some of this information back to India. to Bharat, right? Now, to me, this is unspeakable. This is a no-brainer. This is just like when South Australia tried to give back some statues that were stolen from India. The director of the museum had to pay for the business class ticket for the statue to be placed in to come back to India. So भारत में मुझे शर्म नहीं आता है कभी-कभी कुछ-कुछ ऐसा बात बोलना है कि जागरूक होना चाहिए ना। ये
नहीं
क्या
नहीं
बात है? हाँ?
नहीं, आप सही बोल रहे हैं because these are some basic, but we've not even been able to extract an apology from the British, from Britain for
अरे पॉलिसी छोड़िए आप देखिए
but
ब्रिटेन में क्या हिस्ट्री है, वहाँ पर क्या रिकॉर्ड्स है हिंदुस्तान का
hmm,
और लोगों को ये जानना है कि ब्रिटेन और अंग्रेज से पहले और मुसलमान से पहले वो भी लोग था, वो भी
hmm,
हिस्ट्री था, चोला डायनेस्टी था,
जी
वो
जी
भी और ये सब पुस्तक और रिकॉर्ड्स है
hmm.
और इसको लेने में और वापस लाने में हिंदुस्तान में क्या दिक्कत है?
ऐसे तो बहुत सारी चीजें हैं चार्ल्स जी, there's so much
लेकिन हाँ,
loot that in the museums in Britain.
तो क्या है? लेकिन दुःख की बात ये है कि जितना मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स मुझे बहुत डाँट पड़ने वाला है। जो एम्बेसडर्स बन जाता है, ये लोग फ्रेंच पढ़ लेता है,
हाँ,
जर्मन
जर्मन जर्मन पढ़ते हैं।
अरे नेक्स्ट भाषा हम अब हिंदी में समझाएँगे। ये 4 साल पहले मैं ये पहले भी बतलाया, मैं दिखलाता है आपको। 4 साल पहले हमको हिंदी दिवस सिडनी में बुलाया गया था कॉन्सुलेट में। तो 4 साल पहले जो भी डिप्लोमेटिक स्टाफ था और आज जो है वो सब बदल गया, ठीक है? तो मैं किसी का नाम नहीं ले रहा है, किसी को बतला रहे नहीं। तो मैं गलती से थोड़ा देर के बाद पहुँचा हिंदी दिवस पर, ठीक है? वहाँ 200-300 हिंदुस्तानी बैठा किस भाषा में डिप्लोमेट्स वहाँ का जो इंडियन डिप्लोमेट्स किस भाषा में कार्यक्रम बना रहा था?
अंग्रेजी में।
ओह! तो मैं पीछे से चिल्लाना शुरू कर दिए ना कि देश का आज़ादी हो गया है, 75 साल हो गया, अब डरो मत, हिंदी अब लोग बोल सकता है।
बोल सकते हैं।
अरे लोग बहुत गुस्सा आ गए। मेरे शक्ल को देख नहीं सकता है। सब सोचा है कि कोई बीजेपी, आरएसएस वाला होगा। और अ, जब चाय समोसा किसमें अरे ये तो गोरा अंग्रेज बोल रहा है। तो ये मैं
गॉड।
हिंदी में बताते हैं, अंग्रेजी में नहीं। तो आप समझ सकते हैं ना? तो काम हो रहा है, बहुत कुछ हुआ, बहुत कुछ विकास में दिख चुका है। So much development is happening in India, but we cannot just leave it where it is.
True.
So much more needs to be done.
I agree. I agree. The problem is that we're so thoroughly colonized, Charles G. The colonization of the mind, of the intellect, of everything. We've been so colonized that it's very difficult for us. I mean, some of us, even for people like us who have kind of made that journey a little bit, if for us to be to shed those prejudices, because even today the idea of a successful person is a person who speaks very good English, who has a corporate job and looks westernized. So I mean, not that there aren't people who are very proud of their culture. भारतीय भी बहुत ऐसे लोग हैं जो अपने संस्कृति से बहुत प्रीति रखते हैं, ऐसा नहीं है। लेकिन एटलीस्ट सिटीज में जो हमारे जो अर्बन एरियाज है वहां पे ये बहुत it's a very strong perception. Unfortunately, it's there, and I think slowly we're on that job of yeah.
Oh, okay, let me now I'll tell you another little story. I was just recently in Jaipur, Rajasthan, and I co-hosted a Sanskrit film festival.
Hmm.
Okay. And we had lots of students who could speak I don't speak Sanskrit. I have a little bit of knowledge, but Sanskrit's helped me a lot in my life. And we showed 4 beautiful films in Sanskrit. After the festival, I found myself at the airport at Jaipur, waiting to catch a flight back to Delhi. The gentleman next to me became curious, and because he heard my Hindi, and we had a discussion. He was a senior government officer. I will never disclose his name. We had a very heated discussion. He said the main language of India is English. Now, I've been thinking about this and I've been thinking how to explain to people because I also see this, I've seen this amongst a lot of people in India now and also in the West, where at home they don't speak their Matrivasha. I'm not just talking about Hindi, I'm talking about Tamil, Marathi, Bhojpuri,
Telugu, yes, yes, yes.
Telugu. Now, what I've come to a conclusion, and I have to study this more, but it's just in my thoughts. You see, my mother tongue is English. The first thing I've noticed amongst people who speak English is very rarely do they speak a second language. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is part of the culture of this superiority complex that English is the only language. But there's also another reason. In the English language, there are very few vowels. There's only 5 vowels. Where in Hindi and many others, there are 10 or more. Sanskrit, there are 10 or more. So what happens is when you learn English as your mother tongue, it's very difficult to learn a second language. When you learn German or Hindi or Marathi or Tamil, it's very easy to learn a second language because you're much more aware of different sounds. See, when I was learning Hindi, two words I had great difficulty with were saddi and shaddi. I used to go to a marriage
Could you
and say,
repeat?
saddi,
Sadi?
cold.
Huh?
Even now, my ucharan is not so good. Saddi, when you catch a cold. And
Sardi.
shaddi,
Okay.
yeah, saddi. Even now, my ucharan is not very good. And
Sardi
shaddi.
and
Shadi, marriage, shadi,
Shadi. Okay. Hmm.
shadi. Even now, my ucharan is not very good because I come from an English-speaking background. But
Yes.
I go to a marriage and I go, "Aapka shadi ho gaya," meaning you've got a cold.
Sardi
Now,
ho gaya.
shadi ho gaya. Now, now, think about it. Excluding me, whenever you meet person whose first language is English and they speak a second language, excluding me, generally they're geniuses. They're the head of departments, head of companies. Very rare and very brilliant people. But if you look in a country like India, where people have learnt their mother tongue first, when they've learnt their mother tongue, they become very fluent and easy to learn two, three, or four languages. Why bother? Why bother being multilingual? One of the things I've noticed, because I've also worked in IT companies, and all my colleagues were from IITs, you know, young, brilliant. The first thing I always notice as a rule of thumb, any of my colleagues who could speak more than two or three languages were automatically IT geniuses without saying. So it's really important, and I express this to all the Indian community abroad too. At home, if you have a matrivasha that's not English, speak it at home because the language that your child should hear from the time of birth to, let's say, 10 or 12 should be your mother tongue. They'll learn English, no problems. Once they're out and about in any Western society, whether it's Australia, UK, or United States, Canada, they'll pick it up in no time, in kindergarten and in school. But to learn as their matrivasha, their mother tongue, will be is a great blessing. So this being the ability to be multilingual. Now look at it. Europe, everybody's multilingual. South America, people are multilingual. It's only the Angrej, the UK,
Yes.
America, and Australia. In America, also now many people are speaking Spanish, so that's a different there.
Mm.
People who learn English as their mother tongue, this is a huge disadvantage
Mm.
for their child going for
True.
that. This is a great mistake in India. I have so many times this problem that when I'm speaking to somebody in India in Hindi, they cannot complete the sentence in Hindi. बीच बीच में अंग्रेजी डालता है
ये बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है.
और खास करके हिंदी में बाकी भाषा में मुझे ये गड़बड़ नहीं मिलता है खास करके हिंदी में
हिंदी में, हाँ.
और फिर आदत हो जाता है ना so what happens is when you don't speak a language using all of those words
That's
then
what.
when you go to speak to somebody who doesn't speak that language sometimes by mistake you're throwing in those words. So it's
Absolutely.
really important. If you're going to speak English, fine. But I would strongly suggest the mother tongue or the mother tongues of India, and there are so many of them,
So many.
is so important for the child's development, right? And that is a great, it's very simple thing that you can practice at home, right?
Absolutely, Charles G. It's in fact we had another speaker recently, Mr. Sankrant Sanu. He's based out of America, but he's done a lot of work in this area of promoting indigenous languages, especially the mother tongue, and over English, and has actually we did talk about how exactly what you're telling me right now that those who learn their mother tongue and learn, especially in the early years, it's very easy for them to pick up other languages, especially Indian languages, because they're so rich, with vowel sounds, and they get used to different sounds. So that's, I think, something that I hope people who are watching, especially the ones who have young children, are making a note of, because I myself have a lot of friends, unfortunately, who I mean, the children don't speak their mother tongues, especially, even the children of, if the mother belongs to a different state and the father belongs to it. So there's two different mother tongues. You know what I mean? Father tongue and a mother tongue. But the child, unfortunately, doesn't speak either.
Yeah,
And parents end
I,
up speaking to the child in English.
but I put this challenge to everybody. Whenever you meet a Gora, okay, politely find out if they speak another language. And what you'll find is, except for exceptional Goras, most of them are stuck with one language. Now, I'll give an example in my family. My late grandfather retired as he started from the bottom and he worked from nothing to the very top of the Reserve Bank of Australia. He was fluent in French as a second language. My late father, he's written books on yoga and Eastern mysticism. He was a psychiatrist, and a very famous psychiatrist. He could also speak Spanish, right? So if you want to follow the Goras, one of the things you'll notice with most of the Goras is that they don't. मैं तो इतना ज़्यादा ज्ञानी वाला नहीं है, इतना दिमाग वाला नहीं है, बाकी लोग तो है। लेकिन आप कभी भी कोई गोरा से मिला, देखो, जो डिपार्टमेंट का हेड है, कंपनी का हेड है, वो दूसरा भाषा जानता है, लेकिन बाकी गोरस को नहीं आता है। तो खाए अपना बच्चे को ऐसे ज़बरदस्ती बना रहा है, बेवकूफ
Correct.
गोरा। हाँ?
बेवकूफ बना रहे हैं। बिल्कुल। सही बोला। तो आपने काफी फिल्मों में, अभी जैसे मैंने बोला इंट्रोडक्शन में, कि यू एक्टेड इन सेवरल फिल्म्स, राइट? आपने हिंदी फिल्म में
Yes.
एक्ट किया है, मराठी में किया है, आपने
हाँ,
मीडिया चैनल्स में भी काफी, न्यूज चैनल्स में, बियॉन्ड जैसे चैनल्स में आपने काम किया है। तो डिड यू एवर हैव एनी डिफिकल्टी विथ योर फॉरेननेस? आप देखने में तो
okay.
आप गोरा है
Let,
ही, तो
let's
तो लोगों का रिएक्शन कैसे होता है? जैसे फिल्म सेट्स में जब आप, व्हेन यू आर डीलिंग विद पीपल, वेदर इट इज द टेक्नीशियंस, तो कैसा आपका एक्सपीरियंस कैसा रहा है? मतलब हाउ डू यू डील
okay.
विद इट?
So let me take one example. Doordarshan.
हम्म।
I'm probably the only Gora since Azadi who's had their own TV show. Okay? Now, how did this Gora get a TV show? And that was on Bhojan and Sanskriti. And 11 एपिसोड ऐसी बनाया है कि दूरदर्शन 5 बार रिपीट किया है। बहुत खुश था।
कौन सा शो था, चार्ल्स जी?
उसका नाम था वाह क्या टेस्ट है सीजन 2।
वाह क्या टेस्ट है, हाँ हाँ, जी जी।
सीजन 2 11
सीजन।
एपिसोड। और मैं ऐसा चीज दिखलाए तो कभी सोच नहीं सकते। जूश कुजीन ऑफ इंडिया,
ओह
कोरियन
नाइस।
कुजीन ऑफ इंडिया, अरे लोग कभी सोचे नहीं मैं पूरा बनाया। लेकिन प्रश्न उठता है कि मैं कैसा। द प्रोड्यूसर of my show, an amazing producer from Doordarshan, she met me in Goa at Film Bazaar, but she also met me on the train with her husband. And she said, one day I want to work with you. But the problem was, how do you get a Gora into Doordarshan? It's just not possible. One day, by chance, there was a soft power discussion on Doordarshan, a live soft power, and all of the professors, I think all of the professors, they all had PhDs in Sanskrit or Goras, and I was also on the panel. So this Gora does not have any PhD, Paralikha nahi, but this Gora speaks Hindi. So I talked about my journey with Sanskrit, right? So then my producer went to the DG at the time and pointed and said, and he was a Malayalam. Now I think it's somebody else. Pointed and said, "Is Gora ko hum istemal karna chahiye?" And her show was doing so well. She said, "Okay." So that's
That's how
my
you got.
audition. So when people ask about did I do an audition, my audition was a live audition in front of the whole. I had the whole board, the whole of Doordarshan, because the PMO had instigated that particular soft power episode. And it was
Mm.
an amazing episode with all those Gora professors who all spoke fluent Sanskrit, by the way, all over the world. So, so that was Doordarshan. So like that, my journey with each one has been, but it was not easy. And I've never really wanted to play the role of a foreigner. I've always wanted to play the role of a
Indian,
Hindustan. So,
Hindustani.
okay, so I'll give you another wonderful example, and I'm not mentioning any names. So, I was a struggling artist in Bombay, and I was going to auditions. And I saw this audition. We need an Indian that looks like a foreigner and speaks good English.
Okay.
So I thought, I'll go to this audition. I don't want this audition, but I'll make this casting director think I'm Indian. Okay. So I went to this audition and I said to the casting director, मेरा अंग्रेजी टूटा फूटा है लेकिन मैं बिल्कुल गोरा अंग्रेज जैसे दिखता है. At the end of the casting, he looked at me and said, पक्का अंग्रेज जैसे दिखता है लेकिन तुम्हारा अंग्रेजी नहीं चलेगा. I was so impressed and so happy. Then उसका पेट खराब है, पता नहीं वो बाथरूम चले गया था. उसका बगल में एक लड़का था, उसका दोस्त. तो मैंने हिंदी में से पूछा, आपका आवाज सुन करके ऐसा नहीं लग रहा है कि आप हिंदुस्तान में रहता है. वो
हाँ,
मुस्कुराया, बोलता मैं मेलबर्न ऑस्ट्रेलिया में रहता है.
वो
तो मैंने
लड़का।
उसको बोला, हाउ यू गोइंग मेट. तो मैं बोला चुप, उसको नहीं बोलना है बेचारा, अभी एक तो उसका पेट खराब है, उसको क्यों दुखी करेंगे. मैं तो बस ये देखना चाहता था कि ये गोरा जा करके. अब मैं बतलाता है आपको, मैं हिंदुस्तान में कभी कभी लोग से मिलता है और मैं हिंदी में बोल रहा है और सब सोचते हैं गोरा है. हम बोलते हैं मुझे अंग्रेजी बोलने में कष्ट है. तो हिंदू लोग सोचे मैं कश्मीरी पंडित हूँ और
हाँ,
मुसलमान सोचे मैं अफगानी हूँ. मैं दोनों में खुश. भाई पक्का गोरा अंग्रेज 5 पीढ़ी का इस देश का, ऑस्ट्रेलिया का. मुझे कोई इसमें कोई तकलीफ नहीं है. सो व्हेन यू बिकम एन एक्टर, one you have no shame, and also you're supposed to lose your ego. You
right.
don't mind how people treat you, you know, many times. But also, I mean, I get offended when I see a person in India deliberately speaking English to somebody else, like at an airport or somewhere in a company who doesn't speak English. When that happens, I go and make a fuss. मैं
Yes.
हिंदी बोलना शुरू करता है, उनको शर्म आता है, वो सीट
कर्मा।
दूर चले जाता
बिल्कुल,
है.
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल।
ये तो अब पक्का करता है और ये अब पूरे हिंदुस्तान में किया है. देखिए, तमिलनाडु को मैं बहुत प्रार्थना करता है वानकम नंदरी, लेकिन मैं तमिलनाडु जाता है, मैं पक्का बोलता है मैं अंग्रेजी नहीं आता है. अरे वो तमिल वाला का चेहरा देखने का लायक है. वो थोड़ा बहुत हिंदी मेरे साथ बोलनी पड़ता है, नहीं तो वो तमिल बोलता है. अगर वो तमिल बोलता है हम समझते नहीं, कोई बात नहीं, मैं तमिल भाषा भी सीखेगा. इसमें
हाँ,
कौन सी बड़ा बात है.
करेक्ट, करेक्ट। हे भगवान! हाँ, बट लेकिन अगर आप भारत में कहीं भी हो तो आई थिंक तमिलनाडु में आपको थोड़ा दिक्कत होगा और केरला में भी, वहाँ पे भी
अरे वहाँ दिक्कत इसलिए है क्योंकि ये लोग जानबूझ कर के हिंदी नहीं बोलना
नहीं
चाहता है.
बोलते हैं। हाँ, हाँ।
एक कोई भी तमिल बच्चे के साथ रहेंगे और उनसे ज्ञान प्राप्त होगा. शुरू-शुरू में वो बोलते हैं बिल्कुल हिंदी बंद. लेकिन
हुँ,
अगर हमसे 2-3 हफ्ता, महीना, 2 महीने के बाद जानेंगे, हम इतना उसको समझाते हैं कि तुम 10-15 शब्द सीखो हिंदी में. इसमें क्या बात है? तमिल
प्रॉब्लम
आता है, मलयालम आता है, तेलुगु आता है, तो हिंदी भी थोड़ा बहुत बोल दो, वो सीख जाएगा. लेकिन मैं मानता हूँ कि तमिल सबसे पुराना भाषा है, ठीक है?
हाँ,
वो
हाँ।
बोल रहा है, आप सबसे पुराना है, लेकिन संस्कृत में साइ लिखने देवनागरी सबसे पहले संस्कृत में शुरू हो गया.
स्क्रिप्ट ना?
तो
हाँ, हाँ,
हाँ.
हाँ। अच्छा, आप जब ऑस्ट्रेलिया में रहते हो तो भारत का वो कौन-सा चीज़ है जो आप बहुत मिस करते हो? सो व्हाट इज़ द वन थिंग दैट यू मिस द मोस्ट अबाउट भारत व्हेन यू आर इन ऑस्ट्रेलिया एंड रिवर्स? व्हाट इज़ द वन थिंग दैट यू मिस द मोस्ट अबाउट ऑस्ट्रेलिया व्हेन यू आर इन भारत?
Okay. So in Australia, for example, and I let's say it's a Sunday morning, I wake up. There's no milk in the fridge, and here you don't have any civics. You do everything yourself. So I wake up. I go downstairs. I walk up to the local shopping mall. I see no one. I walk into the shop, pick up my milk, put the money in the machine, walk out, and come home. I've met no one. In India, any day, any time of the day, anywhere you go, somebody will come and say hello, namaste, and they're curious. They'll sit near you. Of course, the best though is in the villages because in the villages they think I'm a boot and they come up and they look at me and I say, "Boot Hindi bhi bolta hai na." So you can never feel lonely in India. This is
Lovely.
the
Yes,
sense of endearment, and particularly at the bottom of the pyramid.
yes.
People at the bottom of the pyramid are the nicest, gentlest things. I often find myself in this incredibly difficult situation where people at the bottom of the pyramid are inviting me into their homes, offering me tea, even as shopkeepers, and not taking money from me. And they're the first people I want to give. The ones at the top, if I don't give, I'm not bothered. But the ones at the bottom, I must.
Yes. Yes, you're right about that.
Area. Okay, what do I miss in India? In India, and this will come in time, but in India, there's two or three things that have to happen, and they have to happen soon. First is, and this is at a municipality level, the understanding of road dust.
Hmm.
Road dust has to be removed. By road dust, what do I mean? When you build the roads infrastructures, even in the irregular, let's call them the irregular colonies, you have to finish the side of the road so when the car, the motorcycle, or the truck hits it, the
Yes,
dust doesn't go back up into the air.
yes.
Otherwise, you have a situation where in Delhi, wherever you go, you look at the trees, they've all got dust on them.
All dust. Yes.
There's some areas of Delhi and Gurugram and Noida where there's enough greenery and enough good infrastructure, you don't have the dust. But most of it. Now we all have to breathe that. That's one thing that I find very
Hmm.
disappointing. The second thing is when I'm in Delhi or Bombay, particularly in the day or night. If I'm in the day, I don't see a blue sky. I see a brown sky. And at night, if it's night and I'm in the middle of Delhi or Bombay, I can't see the stars. But if I'm in Sydney or Melbourne or Perth or Auckland, I can see a blue sky in the day, dark blue, and stars at night. Now, it wasn't like that 30 years ago.
Yes.
A lot of work has to be done. Chalan, जो नेटर लोग हैं वो चालान का शक्ति जानना है बिजनेस सेक्टर में चालान करवाना
Correct.
है
Correct. Correct.
I'll give you an example. In Melbourne, many years ago, they put a camera. So when you cross the red light, it was the first camera in Australia. Now, what happened was everybody who went through the red light, they got a warning notice.
Hmm.
Had they actually charged on that weekend, they would have got $350,000.
Hmm.
So now challans are coming to India. I
Hmm.
know at the very bottom it's a big problem. I understand that at the very bottom. But the middle class needs to get maximum challans in their business
Yes.
from and that money needs to go back to the right spot
Hmm.
for further improvement of the environment. And
Absolutely.
but things are changing. Like when I was shooting in a film, Gaya Mara Mata Hai. So
Hmm.
most of the shooting was done in Haridwar and Rishikesh, and we did it near the Ganges. Now in Haridwar and particularly in Rishikesh, the fish have come back. The water's
Oh,
cleaner.
how
It's
lovely.
beautiful, big, giant fish that you would have seen 40 or 50 years ago. So there's amazing changes taking place, but a lot more needs to be done.
Has to. Yes. Yes. On a war footing.
Oh, yes, absolutely. One of the things that I'm inspired by is the youth of India. The
Hmm.
youth of India now, through social media and
Hmm.
through the Water Rivers program, so many things are being inspired and thinking about the environment. See, I have a habit in India. Wherever I go, I have a jola, and I will never throw anything on the ground, and I put it in my jola. And
Hmm.
my friends, some of them are very senior people, very well educated. When they've had their chai, whatever, they throw it on the ground. I
Hmm.
pick it up and put it in the bin,
Exactly.
and I embarrass them.
That's the only way, Charles. That's the only way you can make prick their conscience.
But
Yeah.
once again, things are changing. In Banaras, Kashi, you go and drink tea, and the tea wala will remind you there's a rubbish bin,
There's a
throw your
bin.
pot over
Yes.
there. So things are changing, but
Change.
so much more needs to be done.
Totally, I agree with you. So you mentioned this film, Guy Hamari Mata Hai, and could you tell us a little bit about the film and also your upcoming projects before we close for this
Okay.
talk today?
So Gaya Mara Mata Hai is basically a Bollywood comedy, but the whole idea is to give the understanding about Desi Gai Ka Doodh. Because you see, if I go to a mother dairy in Delhi and I ask, हमको गाय का दूध चाहिए, अगर वाला बच्चा बोलेगा, अरे क्या पूछ रहा है, क्या बात कर रहा है, दूध तो दूध
हाँ,
है, बोलते मैं
दूध
भैंस का दूध नहीं पीना है, मुझे गाय का दूध
गाय
पीना
का
है,
दूध चाहिए हाँ
मुझे कौन सा दूध दिला रहा है, बोलते भैंस का दूध।
हम्म,
अगर मैं मदर डेयरी में बोलेंगे नहीं नहीं मुझे गाय का दूध नहीं चाहिए भैंस का दूध नहीं चाहिए देसी गाय का वो तुम हरिद्वार ऋषिकेश चले जाओ Australia and New Zealand, the number one milk brand is A2 milk. It's a version
exactly.
of this Desi guy. And the major export from New Zealand and Australia of A2 milk is to China.
Imagine
ठीक है?
that.
Imagine that, no? So this is a wonderful film. Let's see if one of the OTP platforms, maybe एक दिन Netflix थोड़ा अच्छा हिंदुस्तान संस्कृति का फिल्म्स लेने को कोशिश
बिल्कुल,
करेगा।
बिल्कुल।
अब हिंदुस्तान में Netflix पता नहीं उसका क्या सोच विचार है, इसलिए लोग सब्सक्रिप्शन नहीं कर रहा है ना। अगर Netflix सुन रहा है ना हिंदुस्तान वाला, अमेरिकन वाला में मिला सब ठीक है। हिंदुस्तान वाला कुछ हिंदुस्तान का गाय का ये सब चीज का थोड़ा
संस्कृति, बिल्कुल हमारी संस्कृति को दिखाओ।
लगाओ। लोग जबरदस्ती आपको फिर दूसरा लोग के साथ टाई अप करने की जरूरत नहीं है। लोग अपने आप से आपके साथ सब्सक्रिप्शन देगा ना। ये
बिल्कुल।
नेटफ्लिक्स ये जानकारी पहुंचाने की कोशिश कर रहा
जी, बिल्कुल। वही अभी जो भी ओटीटी प्लेटफ़ॉर्म्स हैं, चाहे नेटफ्लिक्स हो या अमेज़न प्राइम हो, थोड़े से वोक हैं, तो उनको थोड़ा-सा
है। बहुत जा रहा है, हिंदी में बहुत जा रहा है।
बहुत ज़्यादा है।
खुद बोलते हैं बहुत जा रहा है। अरे खाली मैंने देखता है खाली वायलेंस लगाता है। ठीक है,
बिल्कुल।
कुछ टीवी सीरियल्स जो बनाया है, बिहार में शूटिंग किया, यूपी में शूटिंग की, ठीक है, अच्छा काम किया है। लेकिन खाली वायलेंस वाला है और भी कुछ लगाओ।
हुँ,
कोरियन सीरीज देखिए,
हाँ,
नेटफ्लिक्स में कितना कमाल है।
कमाल।
मैंडरिन देख
हाँ,
ले, ताइवान का, थाईलैंड का, इंडोनेशिया बहुत अच्छा, टर्किश का। तो चलो नेटफ्लिक्स हिंदुस्तान थोड़ा अच्छा
बिल्कुल।
चल रहा है। पुराना हिंदुस्तान का संस्कृति साथ-साथ में
संस्कृति
सीरियल्स में
हाँ, हाँ। जी, जी, बिल्कुल। तो थैंक यू सो मच
दूरदर्शन
चार्ल्स
अपना
जी।
काम कर रहा है। हाँ,
हाँ, हाँ, बोलिए।
दूरदर्शन अपना काम कर रहा है। अच्छा, आप ये पूछ रहे हैं कि आगे के प्रोजेक्ट्स,
हाँ,
एक्चुअली क्या
आगे
हुआ
आगे प्रोजेक्ट्स बताइए।
अभी कोविड की वजह से सब कुछ बंद हो गया था। तो अब कोविड खत्म हो गया है, मैं धीरे वापस जा रहा है, फ़िल्म फेस्टिवल्स होस्ट कर रहा है। कुछ प्रोजेक्ट से बातचीत चल रहा है, मैं इतना जल्दी में नहीं हूँ। हाँ, है 1-2 अच्छा प्रोजेक्ट है, लेकिन कोई भी फ़िल्म, कोई भी टीवी शो अच्छा वाला है जो थोड़ा-सा मतलब आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स थिंकिंग और थोड़ा विचित्र है, वो 1, 2, 3 साल तो लग ही जाता है बनने में।
हुँ,
उसमें कोई जल्दी होने वाला नहीं है। और मुझे थक गया, मुझे खाली चुनाव कवर करना है पूरा
हुँ।
देश घूमना है, पूछना है चाय वाला को कौन जीतना है, वो थोड़ा उससे थक गया ना।
तो नेक्स्ट ईयर आप कर रहे हैं क्या इलेक्शंस के टाइम में आप फिर से ऑटो वाले बाबू बनेंगे क्या?
काफ़ी नेटवर्क्स हमसे बात कर रहा है। मुझे
हुँ,
इतना शौक नहीं है चुनाव
नहीं
वाला।
है।
मैं
हाँ,
किया ना, अच्छे से किया है और
हाँ।
बहुत ज़बरदस्ती किया है।
जी।
यूपी किया, मध्य प्रदेश किया था, राजस्थान किया था, छत्तीसगढ़ किया था, अरे दिल्ली भी किया। अरे ये
हुँ,
अब मैं हो गया
अब
उसका।
बस। हाँ।
अगर कोई कुछ अलग से है
हुँ,
तो वो अलग बात है। वो
हुँ।
मैं बातचीत चल रहा है, देखते हैं कब होगा।
ओके, ठीक है। ऑलराइट। तो चार्ल्स जी इस पे हम अभी आई विल टेक योर लीव यहाँ पे इस बार फिर से मिलेंगे। थैंक यू सो मच फॉर जॉइनिंग अस वंस अगेन ऑन आवर शो एंड it's always such a delight to get these perspectives from people like you. I have also spoken to, I don't know if you're familiar with Maria Wirth. She's a German Hindu and she also lives in India, and I had in fact had a conversation with her a few weeks ago. So it's always nice to hear from Indians who are also who also have nativity from outside of India, but they bring their own perspectives and their own insights, and it's always a delight to talk to you all. So thank you so much, Charles जी, and फिर मिलेंगे, फिर अवसर मिलेगा तो जरूर मिलेंगे।
जय हिंद, जय भारत।
जय भारत, जय हिंद एंड जय श्री राम।
जय श्री राम। हाँ,
सब्सक्राइबर्स, बिल्कुल आप प्लीज इफ यू एंजॉयड दिस टॉक, share it with your friends. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, I would request you to do so as soon as possible. Like and comment, and please keep coming back for more content. Namaste and Jai Hind.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.